Welcome to ALC Chats, a podcast series developed and produced by the Ageless Living Collaborative. I'm Phoebe Stein, president of Olive Presents and co-founder of the Ageless Living Collaborative. Ageless Living Collaborative is dedicated to optimizing the lives of seniors and giving them the information and tools to live their best lives. The mission of ALC is to listen, educate, inspire, and influence positive change for seniors and those who support the aging community. ALC Chats is another platform to reach those interested in supporting seniors, be it in senior living or aging in place. ALC Chats comes to you as a podcast and in some cases a vodcast. You can find ALC content on our website, www.agelesslivingcollaborative.org, or by following us on social media channels, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and on our own YouTube channel. Whichever place you follow us, we're happy you've chosen to join us. And now we welcome our featured guest.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Today's guest is Jim Bain, Regional Director of Dining Services at Watermark Communities. And today we'll be talking about the senior palate. Now, of course, the senior palate is a little bit different from the palate of a 5-year-old or a 15-year-old or a 35-year-old because it's losing some of its taste buds, which is appalling and scary and alarming. And Jim's going to talk to us about the process and about how seniors can still enjoy food with some adaptations. We'll be talking about everything from how food feels in our mouth to what triggers senses. Jim, welcome.
For having me. Appreciate it.
Let's jump right into why touch is such an important piece of the food experience.
Wow. From a chef point of view, I'd be real honest. I have a very tactile feeling. I really, using my hands, touching food and see what's going on works out very well for me. So I really see a lot going with when I touch the food. But for the residents or older people that in my communities, touch is very difficult because they lose their sensation in their fingers, the nerve endings. You would think as a chef, reaching into an oven and everything, my nerve endings would be gone, but I still can feel everything there. I can actually take stuff out of an oven. It's very hot. Unfortunately, people who are older can't do what I do currently because much of their nerve endings are gone and they're not as vital as they used to be.
Well, we definitely don't want them handling hot plates for
exactly.
Sure. But sometimes touch and food is when you start to eat it, right? It's that part where you've now put it in your mouth and the different textures and sensations of each element.
Correct. It really starts from right on the plate itself when you go to cut your meat, for example. If you because as you get older, your muscles tend to weaken. So when you go to cut something on a plate, such as a piece of beef, it cuts with resistance, and the first thing you think of is the resistance of that meat. It's going to be tough, and I won't be able to chew this.
And especially with people who have dental challenges, exactly. I would imagine that would stop them from going any further.
Exactly. And, you braised foods are, foods with gravies and sauces and foods that are cooked in those are normally a lot easier to eat. They kind of fall apart in the mouth. They're so much easier to cut. People always think, hey, I'll just give a big thick piece of meat on the plate and that'd be great. No, thin slices work best for you. Once again, it's how they are able to cut the meat that they're trying to cut or what they're doing, But everything, you think about the teeth and your tongue and the textures in your mouth and on the top of your palate, it's a sensation. It's really called a mouthfeel, really, when you think about it. How it feels against the surface is what really is a great sensation, you know?
Right. Well, if something feels creamy and almost welcoming,
Right.
that's going to be much better than something that's fighting against you.
Exactly.
Certainly.
Yeah, exactly.
So how do we make it so that as we're getting older, that we have more opportunities and more variety than scrambled eggs and macaroni and cheese?
Again, you gotta choose foods that you know work for you on some of that thing, on some of that. You know, do we necessarily have to go to pureed foods? No, that shouldn't be. But you need to have foods cooked a little more, but not overcooked. So vegetables, for example, you know, a piece of broccoli. If you go into a Chinese restaurant, it's more al dente. Then, you know, and they don't really overcook their vegetables a lot. It's very fresh. It's very green. But you want to get it so it's to a bite where it's able to be chewed well, you know? And
And at the same time, we don't want baby food.
Correct. Exactly. You don't want overcooked broccoli because overcooked broccoli, it looks horrible on the plate, A, and B, it just doesn't taste good. It's the appearance and everything else.
Well, let's talk about taste a little bit, because there are certain things that I know you want seniors to limit in their diet. You don't want too much salt or too much sugar, depending on various dietary and medical conditions. So how do you adjust for that?
Yeah, that's funny that you say that, because the first thing that folks go to as you get older are things they can taste. And sweets are one of them. Sweets,
Sure.
sugars, ice creams. It's really easy for them to eat that because they can taste it. You know,
Right.
If you have hypertension, you certainly taste that salt quicker than if you didn't have hypertension. I don't put salt in my food, but I do know when it's there. And the sense of flavor of salt heightens when you have hypertension, or if you have limited your diet on salt. You can really taste it quickly. You know,
I know that myself, because I always know when something's too salty, and then I immediately stop eating that, right? Because I know I'm going to be drinking an awful lot of water, and it absolutely affects the experience.
Absolutely.
But similarly, if something's too sweet, it's going to do the same thing. So how do we hit that balance, and how do we flavor things without overdoing the salt? You know, I hear from seniors a lot of times. I know from my mother, she would say, "Oh, the food's so bland." And she was a great cook all her life. And so when she was saying it was so bland, it was a red flag that, she wasn't going to be eating it either, right? Because it just wasn't appealing. So how do we adjust for that so that people enjoy their food and they don't stop eating? Because that's another challenge for seniors, because if they don't like the food, the way it tastes or the way it feels in their mouth, they're not going to eat it.
Right. And, I was just at a community last week and talked to a resident. She reminded me that the salt is on the table. And I said, well, I don't cook with salt normally. But she says, if you don't cook with salt, that's great, because we can always put it on when it's on the table. But there are ways around that, using herbs to bolster flavor. Banami, mushroom flavor, or sun-dried tomatoes, cured meats, dried mushrooms. Those things all add flavor to it. And still, it sometimes it adds a slight amount of salt, but it just brightens the flavors of the other things that you're cooking with. Soy sauce. Aged beef, for example, has it on it because it as it ages, it's creating flavor for you.
Right. So maybe there's an alternative that we can put on the table if somebody feels that more flavor is necessary, and it's not just salt.
No, absolutely. This is dashes, as an herb seasoning. I've had that at my table in my community. It worked out very well. The folks loved it, and it gives a lot of flavor without any salt additions.
Right. Right. No, I think that one's great as well.
Mm-hmm.
How do we make adjustments if something has a bitter taste?
Huh. To be bitter taste. Interesting. The whole idea behind bitter is not so you don't eat it. A lot of times, it's to recognize poison, to let you know when foods are bad. But, there are things out there that have bitter taste sometimes. Sometimes you can cook kale or spinaches, and you have to add other seasonings to them to take that bitter taste away.
So is it worth it in the end?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I love spinach, especially with a little garlic added to it. And I like to add white pepper versus black pepper. I think it has much more flavor to it, so.
So are those options that you typically will offer the communities where you're planning the menu and doing the cooking and making adjustments for people to be excited about eating?
Oh, yes, we do make those options for these folks. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. We rely a lot on the dining committee, because everybody speaks to the dining committee.
Oh, yes.
And, we take the feedback and we try to make improvements, and we come up with an action plan for the next time we have the meetings. So we did this. What do you think? Sometimes might be, you got to go back to the drawing board, but other times well appreciated, so.
I often thought when I would visit my mom and go to mealtime with her at her community, that they really missed an opportunity to sell whatever it was, the dinner or the lunch, with smell.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't help but think about Garrett's popcorn in Chicago and how the smell of that popcorn and caramel corn wafts into Michigan Avenue, and it makes everybody want that popcorn. And I often think that would be something that would help seniors get an appetite for the meal.
Absolutely. Actually, we're doing that for our memory care folks. We started cooking in the local houses or kitchens of our memory care, and one of the things we want to do is to get the smells out there, like in the morning, fresh bacon, baking in the oven, or the smell of the soups cooking in the afternoon, things like that, to get them excited and to increase the appetite.
Right. That makes perfect sense. Well, I'm glad you're doing that. Maybe the rest of the community would also be pretty excited to be smelling what's cooking and what's coming their way.
Normally, when you're walking in one of the hallways outside the kitchen, you're smelling that already. You smell bread's baking, and sauces going, and everything else. It's all right there. It's a wonderful feeling.
Absolutely. Well, I think anybody wants to smell what they're about to eat, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
How do you manage in community, especially, challenges with residents who maybe cannot see a menu? How do you adjust for somebody who perhaps has macular degeneration? If they're aging in place at home, somebody is taking care of that element for them. But in community, a lot of times there's a menu that is on the table. So how do you handle that?
It's really interesting because, these folks sometimes take care of themselves, or the wait staff member will read the menu to the resident, or member,
So you guys aren't doing anything by touch? You're not adjusting or making a larger menu for somebody who has a side issue?
What I normally do is with somebody who has a side issue, I sit down, I go over the menus with that person daily, just so they have an idea what's going on.
Okay.
Okay. It's an extra step, but people appreciate it.
Of course they do. I'm thinking about people who don't maybe have less than ideal sight, or maybe are a bit crippled with rheumatoid arthritis and can't necessarily, hold a regular knife and fork.
Yeah. I've had many folks I've been in the dining room with who have been crippled by rheumatoid arthritis. It's really not fun, and they try to be as independent as they possibly can, but at the same time we've gone through and made sure we've helped them out. Maybe they'll pre-cut their meats for them to make it a little easier, or take the skins off the potatoes so it's easier and things like that, just so they can mash it with a fork or whatever they want to do.
That's one. I know there's special utensils for that too. Do you guys ever do that?
Well, I've never. You mean the weighted utensils?
Yeah.
Yeah. My wife suffers from rheumatoid arthritis, and she's not to that point yet. But there are some things that we have to do to help her out in the kitchen, like we have a special can opener that you can actually it's made by OXO, matter of fact, and it's long handled, so it's easy to open up cans or bottles.
Nice. Yeah.
The weighted silverware normally is for people who have Parkinson's or some sort of disease where you're shaking and you can't control the shakes. So
right.
That's where the weighted silverware normally comes in very well. But then, at the same time, instead of the silverware itself, you need to look at the plateware.
Right.
They make plates with a higher rim to it. So you can push the food up against the rim by sliding your fork or spoon or knife or whatever you want to use for utensil. So it catches the rim and goes onto the silverware. So it makes
that's brilliant.
It makes it a little easier to eat.
Sure. That makes a whole lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Well, most people, when they come in, it's a convivial atmosphere. Typically, there are tables that people sit at with their closer friends when they're in community. And aside from complaining about the weather,
or the food,
or the food, or their ailments, but that's an opportunity for them to come together and not complain, right? Because something is really wonderful at the table. In your time in community, what are some of the favorite items that seniors like to see on the menu or enjoy on the table?
Well, let's back up a little bit. They really don't complain about the food. It's the only thing that people will listen to them about, because everybody there is having the same issues. And my son didn't call and I'm upset, but I can't talk about that because nobody wants to hear about it. So I'm complaining about the food.
Right. Of course. Well, it's kind of a common denominator.
It is a common denominator.
Because it's the weather, it's their health, it's the food, and then their family. And if they get into the family thing, it's a rabbit hole.
You got it.
I understand.
Really, a lot of times, this is something that is pretty much unassociated with where I'm going. But I had an ED on a regular basis tell me, if people are complaining of food, they're not busy enough during the day. That means we got to work on it, get them busier.
Right.
Keep them active. So they don't focus on that piece. It's not always about the food. And the food's, myself, I'm like any other kitchen. Sure, I have things that burn. I've done it myself. But I can tell you 99% of the time, it was restaurant quality food going out in my community.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful.
And that was the way I ran my community, because I didn't think of it as any other way. I came from the restaurant business. So therefore, why should I change the way I'm going to do things?
Well, I'm sure people really appreciate that too.
Oh, they did. They loved it. We had great resident satisfaction. So very happy with that. So what are some of the favorites of people? Wow.
Yes.
Fresh fruits, fresh vegetables was one of the bigger things. Buying local for produce in the summer. Having chilled soups in the summer.
That sounds good right now.
Yeah, exactly. There were so many different things that we, just using seasonal vegetables just helped these people out greatly, because they knew it was fresh. and I knew they were getting something special. I marked it on the menus whenever I had on my menus, just let them know. Fresh local seafood when it was in season.
Uh-huh.
Like soft shell crabs, shad roe, things like that. You don't get it that often, but when it's in season, it's nice to have.
That's really special.
Yeah.
Well, of course, because of locale, you had that option.
I did.
But for the landlocked communities, they don't have so much flexibility that way.
Not with the seafood end of things, but as far as vegetables, they could do better than me. Sometimes, I'm sure.
Of course.
Because they're the fruit trees and everything else that are available in those areas versus what's around my area. Might be a little different.
What would you say one of the standards is for the hot, sticky days of summer?
Oh, the residents love watermelons. It's nice, it's cool to eat and, sweet, up their alley, Hard melons are a turnoff. If you don't let them ripen or if they don't get them ripe, they don't like melons at all.
Right.
They're hard to eat.
That goes for everybody.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Strawberries, always good. Blueberries, fresh stuff like that.
Nice. Well, on that kind of thing, there's always a preference too. Somebody really loves blueberries, not so much strawberries. I think it must be very difficult to determine a menu for a community, knowing that if you've got 300 people, you've got 300 opinions.
You're right. So I need to cook for the vast majority. So, I think one of the things, we have a big garden out in our backyard, and I bring in the fresh tomatoes. I could not bring in enough fresh tomatoes. They love tomatoes in the summertime.
I'm right with them. I think that's fabulous. Well, sometimes people have medical issues and they can't have certain things in their diets. We're not talking just about salt or about sugar content, but about other elements that
like
maybe become a digestion issue. Exactly. So how do you adjust for that?
Well, it's very hard to adjust for that. Once again, we can't cook around one person or two people, but we do make offerings for those folks. If we're serving, for example, if you're on blood thinners, you're not supposed to have green vegetables. Okay, anything like spinach or parsley or anything like that, because it works against the medicine, from what I understand. So with something like that, I always had a variety of vegetables on the menu, so they had something else to choose from. To help out, make your choices a lot easier.
Well, that's the best of all possible worlds for absolute sure. Watermark definitely has that availability, I believe. Have you ever worked with other communities where you maybe had different criteria?
And actually, I can be honest, I went from the restaurant business to
Watermark.
To Watermark, right. Exactly.
Okay. Well, how fortunate for you. Talk to me a little bit about what the best herbs are for flavor replacement. If we're going to get the salt out, you don't cook with salt. So what are you using instead?
Well, it's not really using it for salt. It's to boost flavor within the product. For example, sage with the poultries. Okay. I like to use thyme when I'm cooking, with starches and stuff like that. You add the garlic, you add the, what else do we put in there? Just the herbs that you have there. Once again, thyme works great on that. Black pepper, and cooking with those. I find all those things are, good flavor substitutions and brings out more flavor. It becomes, you don't want to make it the primary flavor of the dish, but you want it to enhance what's going on. Tarragon, another one. It's great. It has a nice licorice flavor, and you can do a lot with it.
Right. Do you see any kind of food trends at the moment with regard to dining in community? I know we go through food trends in restaurants, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, one thing is out, the other thing is in. People aren't really eating liver and onions or casseroles to the degree that they were in, say, the 50s. So what are some of the food trends happening right now that you also offer in communities?
Okay, so Watermark itself is we have what's known as a Taboon restaurant, and it's offering the Mediterranean diet. Now, you think about the Mediterranean, how many countries are around that Mediterranean, and how many different types of cooking, from Spanish to Italian to Turkish. You think about that, all the way around to the Greek. There are so many opportunities there, and it's healthy cooking. It's very healthy cooking. Everything is light, olive oils and fresh vegetables. It's an amazing area to focus in on, with just so much opportunity for change on the menus.
The blue zone, right? The
Yeah.
blue zone. Yeah, got it.
Is that right?
It's right on trend.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, it's a great way of looking at things. We have it. We're using the Taboon restaurant. It's an open kitchen, so it's a display kitchen, and you can see us using the Taboon oven, which is a big, large. It's not a pizza oven by any means. It's actually it's a rounded oven, and what it does is the heat rises and in the center, and then circulates all the way around. So it's amazing. It really, truly is.
It sounds that way. Well, I think it's fair to say you'd be fortunate to be dining in your community, having you oversee dining. But for anybody who is listening to this podcast, I think there's some great takeaway tips insofar as seasoning and texture for creating appetizing plates for seniors. And if anyone has a question specific to dining and creating a dish for seniors, certainly feel free to write that question at the agelesslivingcollaborative.org website, and we'll get back to you with an answer from Chef. But for today, we really appreciate the time, Jim, and we have a new appreciation of the various thinking and tools and foods that go into creating a welcoming, inviting senior plate. And I think it's safe to say that if it looks pretty and it tastes good and it's good, it's going to be good for you long term. And of course, we want our seniors eating healthy foods and making adjustments that work for them and their needs. So thank you for sharing your insights. And anybody who would like to have more information on senior dining, please visit our website. Thanks so much for your time today, Jim.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Appreciate it myself. Enjoyed my conversation with you.